$8,400. That's what the check stub said. Mark had written it from our joint savings, the account I had been filling for 3 years, working a second job 4 nights a week, while he told me we were almost ready to buy our first house. The check was made out to a hospital. His mother's surgery, he'd said. Emergency procedure. Couldn't wait. But I verify insurance claims for a living. I check hospital names against provider databases every working day. The hospital on that check stub was not registered anywhere in the national system. Not licensed. Not real. And when I ran the routing number on the canceled check, it didn't resolve to a medical facility. It resolved to a casino credit account. I found the check stub on a Tuesday evening, folded inside Mark's jacket pocket while sorting laundry. And I want to be honest about what I felt before I felt suspicious. I felt afraid. Not afraid of Mark. Afraid of what the stub might mean about the life I thought I understood. Mark and I had been married 8 years. He was genuinely kind in ways that don't photograph well. The kind of man who noticed when I was tired before I said so, who kept our budget spreadsheet updated on Sunday mornings, who walked the neighbor's dog when she broke her hip without anyone asking. I loved him. That isn't past tense by convenience. I loved the person I was married to, and some of what I loved was real. When we decided to save for a house, we set up a joint account. Both contributing, Mark managing the transfers because he was organized and I was working too much to track it closely. I took a second job, night shift data entry at a logistics company, 4 evenings a week after full days adjusting claims. 3 years. I missed dinners, weekends, sleep. I told myself the sacrifice had a shape. A 3-bedroom house with a yard I had already measured for a garden one Saturday morning with a tape measure and a drawing on graph paper. He wasn't better with numbers. But I didn't know that yet. Mark's mother, Patricia, was warm in a way that made you want to be around her. She remembered what you said 3 visits ago. She brought gifts, cashmere scarves, good wine, things I wouldn't have bought myself, and she always insisted on paying for dessert. I noticed that her generosity seemed slightly ahead of her income, but I filed that the way you file a detail on a claim you're not assigned to. Noted and moved on. What I didn't know then, what I'm not sure Mark fully understood either, was that Patricia's warmth and her spending were connected to the same thing. They were both expressions of a life she couldn't quite control. The routing number on the check resolved to the credit services department of a casino resort in Atlantic City. I verified it through the same commercial database I use for claim reimbursements. Not a hospital, not a medical facility. I sat with that information for almost an hour before I pulled the bank statements. Part of me didn't want to look. I know how that sounds. The woman who checks financial documents for a living, hesitating to check her own. But professional pattern recognition and personal willingness are different things. At work, the story on the page belongs to a stranger. At my kitchen table that Wednesday evening, the story was mine. I pulled 14 months of joint statements. I used a highlighter because that's what I do, and doing something familiar kept my hands steady. 23 withdrawals I hadn't authorized. Small at first, 300, 500, then climbing. 1,700. 2,400. 3,100. The amounts escalated and clustered around the 1st and 15th of each month. I recognized the progression from my work. In claims involving gambling-related financial losses, the escalation pattern is well documented, increasing amounts to recover previous losses, timing tied to available cash. Total across 14 months, $47,200. Then I found a casino loyalty program mailer in our joint email account, the account Patricia had access to. The mailer welcomed a VIP Platinum tier member by name. The name was Patricia Holden. I closed the laptop. I sat in the kitchen with the lights off for a while. I thought about the scarf she gave me last Christmas. I thought about the garden I had measured, $47,200. 3 years of night shifts. I want to tell you I went to Mark immediately with calm, collected clarity. I didn't. I sat in the dark kitchen and cried, not because I was weak, but because something I had built with 3 years of exhaustion had been taken, and the person who took it was sleeping upstairs. I confronted Mark the next evening. I put the bank statements on the table and asked him to explain them. He tried. In quick succession, he offered a banking error, a temporary loan, a claim that Patricia was going to lose her house. Each explanation replaced the one before it, and I watched him cycle through them with a feeling I can only describe as recognition. Not just professional, although that was there. Personal recognition? This was a man who had been managing someone else's crisis for so long that he had a library of cover stories organized by severity. When the explanations ran out, he told me what he was willing to call the truth. Patricia had been gambling. For years. He had been covering her debts from our account. He said she had stopped. He said it was over. I asked how long he had known. 3 years. The same 3 years I had been working 2 jobs. He didn't say it to be cruel. I don't think he had made the connection until I said it back to him and watched it land on his face. 3 years of my night shifts. 3 years of his silence. Running on parallel tracks in the same marriage, pointed in opposite directions. I told him he had 2 weeks to put together a plan to address the missing money. He agreed. He looked relieved. And I noticed the relief, because in my work I've learned that relief after a disclosure usually means the person believes the worst part is over. Didn't know yet that the worst part hadn't started. The next 12 days were strangely normal. Mark didn't bring up the money. He seemed lighter, attentive even, cooking dinner, asking about my day, as if tenderness could fill a $47,000 hole. On the 13th day, I came home to flowers on the kitchen counter. Yellow tulips. And a card from Patricia. For your generous heart. Thank you for helping our family. I had never spoken to Patricia about money. I had never agreed to help. I had never been asked. I showed Mark the card. After a pause, he admitted he had told his family that I knew about the payments and supported the decision. That I understood why it was necessary. That I had agreed. I don't think he did this to corner me. I think he did it because telling his family the truth, that he had stolen from his wife to fund his mother's addiction, was something he could not face. So he built a version where I was a willing participant. It was a lie, but it was the only version of himself he could stand. Mark's sister texted that evening. So glad it's resolved. You're amazing. I stared at that message for a long time. In the family's understanding, I was now a woman who had agreed to this. If I said otherwise, I was going back on my word. If I said nothing, the theft became a gift. I photographed the card next to the check stub, one from a hospital that didn't exist, one for a generosity that never happened. I didn't know exactly what the photographs were for. I just knew that when the story gets rewritten around you, you hold on to the version that's true. 3 weeks after the flowers, a letter arrived from a bank I had never used. Inside was a payment notice for a personal loan. $15,000. Both names on the application? 60 days past due. I had never applied for this loan. I had never signed any application. I requested the original documents. When they arrived, I turned to the signature page. My name was there, in handwriting that was close to mine but not mine. I review signature documentation in subrogation claims regularly. I know what a traced signature looks like. My husband had forged my name on a loan application. I sat with the document at the kitchen table, the same table where I had highlighted the bank statements, the same table where I had read Patricia's card, and I tried to understand what I was looking at. Mark hadn't fixed anything. He had opened a personal loan using my forged signature, taken the cash, and deposited it into our joint savings to create the appearance that the original funds had been returned. The $47,000 was still gone. The loan was active, and 60 days of delinquency had appeared on my credit report. My professional license as a claims adjuster requires a clean financial record. A delinquency could trigger a regulatory review. Mark had put my career at risk with a document I never signed. I want to tell you I was angry. I was. But underneath the anger was something quieter and worse. The realization that when Mark needed to solve a problem, he solved it by using me without asking. Twice. I went to the lending bank the next morning. I sat with the loan officer who had processed the application, a woman named Claire, and placed my driver's license beside the signature on file. Claire studied both documents. "These don't match," she said. The application had been submitted online. No in-person verification. Claire explained the process for a fraud referral, internal investigation, account freeze, potential law enforcement notification. She was professional and direct, and she treated the problem as what it was, a documented matter with a documented path. I filed the referral. I filed a police report that evening, prepared the way I would prepare a contested claim at work, dates, amounts, a printed timeline. I didn't call Mark to the bank. I didn't arrange for him to see his handwriting next to mine under someone else's supervision. I just needed the fraud referral processed and my name separated from a debt I never agreed to. I went home. Mark was in the kitchen when I walked in. I put the loan application on the table between us, the original, with both signatures visible. He looked at it for a long time. "Did you sign my name on this?" He didn't answer immediately. When he spoke, his voice was very quiet. "I signed your name because I knew you'd say no. And someone had to help her. I've sat across from people making difficult admissions for 9 years. I know what a rehearsed excuse sounds like, and this wasn't one." Mark believed what he was saying. He genuinely believed that forging my signature was an act of care, that his mother's need was so consuming, that my consent was an obstacle he couldn't afford. That was the moment I understood. Something about my husband that I hadn't understood before. Not that he was a bad person. He wasn't. But he had spent his entire adult life inside his mother's crisis. And somewhere along the way, the boundary between helping her and using the people around him had dissolved so completely that he could no longer see it. "I filed a fraud referral at the bank," I said. "And a police report." His face changed. "Sarah, don't make this official. It's already official." "It was official when you put my name on a document I didn't sign." He started to argue about family, about loyalty, about how the loan would have been paid off eventually. I listened because after 8 years I owed him that much. But listening didn't change what he had done. "I'm not doing this to punish you," I said. "I need the loan off my credit. I need my professional record clean. Those are not revenge. They're facts." He sat down and put his head in his hands. I stood in my own kitchen, looking at the back of his head, and I felt something break that I don't think either of us knew how to fix. Patricia called that night. Her voice had a quality I recognized, the particular urgency of someone who has just learned that documentation exists. "He'll have a record," she said. "Think about the family." "I am thinking about the family." Then quieter. "I know I caused this." That was the first honest thing Patricia had said to me in the entire ordeal. She didn't apologize for the gambling or the money or the years of hiding. But she acknowledged the chain of cause. And I heard underneath the panic something I hadn't expected: exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who has been managing a secret for so long that the exposure is almost a relief, even as it terrifies her. I didn't comfort her. But I didn't hang up. Mark's sister, Rachel, called the next day. She hadn't known about any of it. The gambling, the savings, the loan. When I told her, her voice went flat in a way I recognized. The sound of something solid turning out to be paper. "I should have asked where Mom's money came from," she said. "The gifts." "I should have wondered. You didn't know." "That's important." A week later, Mark wrote me a letter. 3 pages, handwritten. It wasn't an apology. It was a history. Growing up watching Patricia spiral. Covering her overdrafts in college, lying to his father. Managing her crises through his 20s and into our marriage, until the pattern was so deep, he couldn't tell the difference between love and damage control. He said he never intended to hurt me. I believe him. Intention and outcome are different things. I read the letter at the kitchen table. Then I put it in a folder. Not to use against him. Because in my work, you learn that the explanation for how something went wrong is worth keeping, even when it doesn't fix anything. The loan was frozen within 2 weeks. The fraud department confirmed the signature mismatch and voided the balance. My credit was corrected over 60 days. My professional license was never at risk. The fraud was committed against me, not by me. The $47,200 was a civil matter I chose not to pursue. Litigation would have consumed most of what I'd recover. That wasn't forgiveness. It was arithmetic. Mark moved out. Patricia entered a treatment program 6 weeks later, not voluntarily, but because Rachel made it a condition of continued contact. Rachel told me afterward, "Someone had to name it. You were the first person who did. I still adjust claims. I still sit across from people whose financial stories don't hold together. The work hasn't changed. But I bring something different to it now. The understanding that the distance between the professional and the personal is smaller than I once believed. Don't hate Mark. That would be simpler and I would prefer it. What I feel is more complicated. The particular grief of loving someone whose damage made them dangerous to you, not because they wanted to cause harm, but because they couldn't see you clearly enough to know they were doing it." He wasn't better with numbers. He was a man who had been managing his mother's catastrophe since he was 20 years old, and by the time he married me, the habit of concealment was so deep it looked like competence. I mistook it for something I could lean on. That was his failure and mine. The house I found, the 3-bedroom with the yard I measured for a garden, sold to someone else. I drove past it recently. Someone planted tomatoes where I would have put herbs. I noticed that, and then I noticed myself noticing, and I kept driving. I have a 1-bedroom apartment now. A lease in my name. A savings account that belongs to me. A credit report I rebuilt because I was willing to do the paperwork. These are smaller things than the life I was building, but they're mine, and I verified every one of them. I don't know if Mark and I will speak again. I don't know if Patricia's treatment will hold. I don't know if the family will stop telling the version where I was the one who broke things apart. There are a lot of endings to this story, and most of them haven't happened yet. The hospital wasn't real. The gratitude wasn't real. The signature wasn't mine. But the woman who checked, the one who sat at her kitchen table with a highlighter and didn't want to look but looked anyway, she was real. She still is.